friend Ulrich Beck. Since the last time I was here, it was to celebrate his anniversary. And it's, as I know, very familiar to many of you. I'm going to talk about the orientation inside the Earth, and I want to try to make you understand what I mean by this new shift, so to speak, in the way we understand that we are not on Earth, but inside the Earth in some way. And as you know, we have bad news and good news. The bad news, of course, is that the new director of the American Environmental Agency is actually an enemy of everything about regulation of the environment. So this is one of the big effects, major effects probably of Mr. Trump election. And the good news is that the Anthropocene group, which has been working, as you know, every day to try to understand what the Anthropocene could mean, has finally solved a problem of actor network theory in a very beautiful way, because many years ago, in a paper in '93, I tried to point out the missing mass of sociology, and I said, we know everything about social ties in sociology, but there is a missing mass, and this missing mass is actually the technology, things that are very well known in the Deutsche Museum nearby. And it's interesting that in the new paper, which is just out, they actually did calculate the missing mass size, and this is what they conclude. Highly preliminary estimate of the major continents of the Earth system co-opted into the technosphere indicate a mass of around 30 trillion tons, equivalent to 50 kilogram meter square Earth surface. And the total is 5 orders of magnitude greater than the standing biomass of humans. So now we sort of know our ignorance about what it means to be a social actor. We need 100,000 more weight to understand the whole technology that each of us is actually depending on. So these are the news on the front line of the Anthropocene question. Okay, what I want to do is very briefly try to see if we can reorient ourselves politically, so to speak, inside the Earth, knowing that we are now submitted, so to speak, to sort of disorientation in 3 different dimensions. We don't know where we are in space, we have difficulty deciding where we are in time, and very, very difficult to decide which sort of agency we now represent. The disorientation in space is marvelously described by the title of a book by McKibben, someone who is familiar to all of you, of course. The name he found is not very good, EF, it's fairly horrible name, actually, EF. But it's interesting that the subtitle, Making a Life on the Tough New Planet. And it's very interesting that in fact, what the Anthropocene brings us is a new planet, as if we had sort of all the trespassing to another place, or transported or uplifted, so to speak, on a new planet, the control of which are now disputable. And we don't need the word, here is not a word which is going to last, but we need the idea that Fitzgibbon, who is very well placed to understand the argument, has articulated. Michel Serres, many years ago, made the point in a very nice way, which is rethinking of a famous sentence by Galileo, a course in warming, but reinterpreting slightly differently, not as it is usually understand, and yet the Earth moves, et pourtant elle se meut, we will say in French, which means that the Earth is actually circling around planet among the planet, and in the spotted history sign we all have in mind, but a slight shift, a slight change in the way we understand simorphic, which in French would be translated by elle s'émeut. I don't know how it's a joke would work in German, and yet the Earth is moved. That is, the Earth has stopped being the framework seen from outside as a planet among the other planets. It has become again something which is an actor on which we, the trembling and tremor of which is now felt by every one of us, even when we are not concerned by the question of earthquakes, like people in Italy or in many other places in the world. So this sort of trembling and tremor of the earth is a new definition of Galileo's discovery, and this is basically what the Anthropocene tried to understand and captures in space. We are in a different space also for another reason, is that the globe itself is not necessarily the way we understand where we are. And here I want to make a slightly counterintuitive point, is that this very famous image, which is the limit of the notion of the globe, which is supposed to be the blue planet, which has a long history itself. Many books now have been written on this image. The image is everywhere in the thinking of ecology. It's supposed to have assembled us. It's supposed to have made us politically unanimous about the question of nature, and we know how wrong it is. Basically, the globe, the planet is not a globe. It's something very, very different, and that's the point I want to make in this short talk. One of the reasons is that when we talk about the globe, of the global mondialization and globalization, we mean completely different things. One of them is a sort of classical cartographic definition of the global, which means that we have one system of coordinates, and we register with this system of coordinates as many differences as possible through exploration, through cartography, through many of the tools which have been developed for the last 3 centuries. But globalization means something else entirely now, which is not the registering of differences, which is on the contrary the expansion from one very provincial definition of what it is to be a human, what it is to calculate, what it is to have interest, what it is to be a servant, to as many places as possible. So what you see on the right side, which is still called globalization, is exactly the opposite of what we could mean by globalization as the registering of as many differences and multiplicity as possible, in a sort of charitable definition of cartography. And that's a big point. Because when people fight against globalization, and I'll come back at the end, we don't know what to fight against. Do they fight against the left definition of globalization, or do they fight against the right definition of globalization? In which case, many of us here probably will also fight against globalization if we mean the extension to every corner of the planet of a very provincial definition of what it is to be human. The reason why this is so important is that, of course, it's because of what happened at the COP21 in Paris exactly a year ago, actually even almost to the day, when people decided, as you all remember, that there was a way to actually unite around the notion that the globe was actually no longer the common horizon. Because if you want to interpret diplomatically what happened that day, really what happened is that people have to have been assembled and proposed to every one of them, all the delegates assembled, and told each other how they would see, how would their economy would evolve in the next 15 or 25 years. What they realized is that there was no globe. There was no actually physical plan to accommodate all the different wishes. And that's what the French diplomatic corps did very well, which is to ask everybody to say, okay, what do you want in 25 years? What do you want in 25 years? What do you want in 25 years? And let's make the sum. And the sum is, there is no plan for that. There is no way. I'm sorry. There is no place where we can actually assemble all those desires simultaneously together. And as you know, they concluded something which they cannot, of course, succeed in obtaining, which is a 1.5 degree limit, which now, with the election of Mr. Trump, looks like a pie in the sky, really. But what is interesting diplomatically is that this moment of unanimous approach, which is symbolized by the civil initiative, is also the moment when the notion that we were all modernizing the planet toward the horizon of the globe was already gone. No one believed that it's possible. And that's a very negative in a way, but also a very positive way of understanding what happened. So on disorientation, this time in time, that since the influence of the Carson Center here in Munich is very important, I think I can pass very briefly because it's linked to the notion of the Anthropocene. To be in the Anthropocene, even though there is a large disagreement on the date, is to doubt the time period in which we are placed. And I've remarked many times how strange it is that it's a group of stratigraphers and geographers and climate scientists who are actually assembling to decide in which time we actually live, which is, I think, the first time in history, the human period of history of geology has been defined by geologists that it was rare for a period of human history. But now there's one geohistory, and they are defining it very well. Now, what is interesting here is that there's also a disorientation in agency. And I think if there is so much trouble around the political question of what to do with the ecological question, it's also due to the fact that we have no idea who we are, those who have to take into account this disorientation in space and time. And Oliver Morton, in a very important book on geoengineering, does it very well when he says, the paradox in a nutshell is this: humans are grown so powerful that they have become a force of nature, and forces of nature are those things which, by definition, are beyond the powers of humans to control. Which is a new way of representing the old question of what is a human and what it is to be a human on Earth in a new Anthropocene situation, but with the same sort of hesitation and trouble which has always accompanied in the history of humanity what it is to be human. But this time with a sort of excess paradox, because we are simultaneously all told that we have responsibility on the planet, but this responsibility is precisely to be a part of the basically geology, rocks formation, which is nothing like what we can relate to. So this is the point that we have to tackle. And I cannot, of course, and this is right in the direction where the Rachel Carson Center is, of course, placed, not to see the parallel with the discussion which was going on in the 17th century after the religious war with the absolutely crucial question of political order and the invention of the state. And that's why I think it's not just me who sees the parallel between these two images, the one on the left, which is the cover of Nature, and the famous one on the right, which is the frontispiece of Hobbes' Leviathan, with the same question, so to speak, of what it is to compose the body of all these different types of entities, except that in the one on the right, which is mid-17th century, there is an order between imposed and which order, very important ones, by the major decisive work of Thomas Hobbes. While on the left side, it's a mess. I mean, this composite body is a blind character which is made of all sorts of technology and biological elements, but which is sort of blindly groping in the dark, and it has no head, actually. It's physically, I mean, artistically, the description of exactly the situation where we are, which is we are in a state of nature, which has no definition, and no definition of its power and of its sovereignty. The head of the character on the left is not only hidden by the name nature, but it's actually in the drawing drawn by the artist. It has no head whatsoever, which is the last definition of where we stand. And the task for all of us to try to reorient ourselves is just to try to figure out as many of the questions which was raised by Hobbes at the time of the 17th century, but in a different regimen, where this time we have to take into account the same question, that the settlement of a modernist tradition, so to speak, but in a very new we still have the same question of authority, except we have no idea what is the authority which is beyond us, so to speak. We have no idea that we have to solve the question of the type of knowledge with which we have to be able to produce the certainties which are necessary for producing this order. And of course, this is not easy given the extent of a false controversy about ecology, false controversy which is going to spread even more now with Trump's election. And we have no idea which people. What is the people made of all of these citizens, a term which has probably to be reinvented, which are now part of the Anthropocene institutions, which are a new type of agency for which we have no real model, if we believe what the people in the Anthropocene are doing, Anthropocene groups are doing. That's a new situation also for Earth history, which is this long period of quite time, at least as when the Earth was a decor, is now being modified much more deeply, and it's a new point for all of us in the Anthropocene. And that, of course, defines the numbers of the Earth, to use the famous sentences in a different way, and basically the cosmological question, with which humanities and the science always have to sort of explicitly fight. But this time we have to do it in a new way, and especially in a new urgency. And this is what I'm trying to do now, and I just want a few slides on the work I'm trying to do now with geoscientists, to try to get out of the notion of a globe, because it's actually a confusion of metaphor and also a scientific confusion to take the Earth as a globe. When we talk about most of the phenomena we are interested in ecology, we are talking about something else than the Earth as a globe. We are talking about something which is more defined as a surface, as a thick skin, as a varnish, which some of the scientists I'm studying call the critical zone. And it's a very small pellicule, if you want, where everything we know about life and everything we know about Earth is actually occurring. That for which the word globe or the word planet, all these words which have been defined by the Galilean tradition, don't actually carry the meaning exactly and well enough. We need, and this is a very famous trick from Paul Duvignol's book, very old actually, 40 years ago, La Synthèse Ecologique, which is a study of this very, very small exchange and processes between all of those entities, from the top of the canopy to the bottom of the deep rock, where all of the things we are concerned by are actually assembled, but for which our knowledge, as far as the sciences of ecology are concerned, is not actually that great. And this is, of course, this very interesting return of the question of the soil in many, many different domains. You see many exhibitions now by artists that are interested by the soil. This is the case where we are in North Carolina with Professor Richter, which is the destruction of the soil and in a plantation which has been abandoned for 80 years and for which the soil has never grown back because we need minerals in order to produce a soil again. So there's a whole new, very interesting interest in the definition of the soil, in the interest for the soil. Of course, the soil was always there, but it was not marked as a major science before, and even though they were soil scientists, they were not considered as crucial as they are now. And the link between soil, all the political questions about what it is to have a soil or to lose the soil, all the question of migration, about losing one soil and going to another soil, are of course actually resonating through many of the artwork as well as the political science and hard natural science work in those questions around the soil. And what those people do in critical zone, which is why I'm so interested in what they do, is that they are trying to basically equip, if you want, bits of the landscape, bits of geography, trying to produce as much data as possible on, let's say, water catchment, and also to build the apparatus, the whole feedback mechanism which allows us, the users, so to speak, of the landscape, to become sensitive to what happened to this landscape. Something that people who work with the Carson Center will recognize immediately. And here you have a nice scale, where on the top you have a whole series of trees, which I don't know if you see it well, but they are all equipped by these observatory networks called the Critical Zone Observatory Network, which is a foundation of the National Science Foundation in the US. And on the bottom, you have a completely different landscape, which is the deep valley, the valley inside California, which is completely different sort of attitude, even though water is the same. There's only water down there, which is on the top there. Nonetheless, it's as different as the moon is from the Earth. And it's very difficult to make the connection for lots of reasons, legal reasons, property law reasons, between what happened on the top, and you know that there is a big drought now in the north of in this part of California, and the water which is below in this completely flat land, which is in a way disconnected for all of the users from the origin in the Sierra, where the water is coming. And if you work on any scientific controversy in ecology, you know that this thing, you cannot just say that it's the same water upstream and downstream. It makes absolutely no difference. It's not the same water for the people. You need to build the feedback mechanism that render the upstream river visible to the downstream people. Even though the physical reality and the theatrical movie of the two places, the South Sierra and the bottom, are so entirely different. So this is what I'm interested in, and I'm sure many people who are interested in ecology here in Germany understand very well what is this question. But there is a philosophical one as well, and this is just a little bit of philosophical worry I have. Which is, I'm sorry, my diagram is very simple-minded, but it might be that one of the difficulties we all have in our own work to convince people that the question of nature is very important is because we are wrong to still use the notion of nature. Because nature is a term, a concept, which accumulates and gathers together so many different things that it's very possible to really understand what we mean by the part of nature, the critical zone on which we actually live. So there might be an interesting point to be made, and here I'm making a point of political philosophy, an interesting disconnection between what we talk when we talk about nature outside, let's say, deep space or the bottom of the earth, and the very thin layers where all the processes by which we are concerned are actually occurring. Critical zones, or why not this old Greek word physis, which has been pushed aside at the time of Galileo, but which in many ways is coming back when we hear about an active entity inside which we are and to which we participate. But we are not in nature. This is not a return of nature. It's not a protection of nature. And probably it was a completely wrong target, which might explain the lack of interest and the complete failure. The United States is one example now, that more generally the complete failure of all our interest in ecology and political ecology in interesting anyone to the question of nature. Because nature is too big. And you cannot put in one concept of Big Bang, the center of the earth, and the question of water for the alimentation and all these things. You need a concept that is local, which actually represents in a much more clearer sense what the critical zone is actually doing. This is actually the argument which I want to make. I'm going to finish on this way in which, after having said we are disoriented, is there a way to reorient ourselves and to try to capture the difficulty and complexity of the present situation? But this is one very rough way, but it's very possible that we are organizing our political definition of ourselves around two poles, which I've summarized, and I think the discussion the sort of fake or rigged, I don't know how you have to call it, the rigged election between Clinton won the vote in a way, and Trump also won the vote in a way, is a good illustration. But the discussion is still between how much local are you, or are you back to the past, are you vis-a-vis how global and modern and progressive and forward you are. So that you organize the discussion between progressiveness and reactionary, so to speak, along the line going from 1 to 2. The land of all, which is of course not the old land, but it's a sort of retrospective invention, and the globe, which, as we know, and I said before, is now impossible. So we need a way, so to speak, to shift the discussion away from this obsession to organize the attribution of political position around this 1-2 connection. And that's the third one, but one, I cannot, like Machiavelli call it the earth, I mean, it's very difficult. It has to be to found name. I call it Gala for lots of reasons, but this is a better representation by a friend of mine. The third one on the bottom right, you see, doesn't look like a globe. It has some of the character of a globe, but not all. And it has some, but not all, of the aspect of what was the land, this land, mythical land that people want when they claim, let's go back to the past, let's make America great again, let's go back to a Germany of the past, let's go back to the National Front of France, or to the Northern League in Italy. I mean, all this, of course, land of all don't exist really. I mean, they are just myths. But don't forget, the other one, the globe of globalization, is also a myth. So we are sort of taken on in between these two utopias, and there is no wonder that we are all sort of lost. It's as if we were in a plane, and the plane was going to the globe, and the pilot says, sorry folks, but the globe is no longer there. And then the flight turned back and said, well, okay, let's go back at least to the old land that we know exists and is solid. The ethnic, national boundary with border. And here the pilot gets on the phone again and says, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but the land of all has disappeared as well, and there's no way to land there. And everybody looked at the window. Well, that's where we are looking now. But at the window, what we look through the window is something which people in ecology and political ecology from hard science or soft science or humanities have a responsibility to describe with great precision. And it's not nature. It has nothing to do with nature. It's something completely different in terms of science as well as in terms of its humanities. And that's my little final point, is that this argument has to be done by a somewhat different mobilization of the university. And that's why I'm very pleased to be a member of the board of Carson Center, because I think they're trying to do something which is not just adding an outreach to the university academic work, but it's defining the task of a university as being able to produce a sort of shift in the definition of where we are, where we stand, and who we are, through the different disciplines, but where the notion that we need performance and design in order to modify the public engagement is the definition of a university. We could call it the neo-Humboldtian university, if you wish, but Alexander Humboldt, not the brother, where it's the definition of science and by Alexander Humboldt, who would be the sort of direction given to the study of the Earth, as the Earth as critical zone, not the Earth as the nature of the. I think I will stop here. Okay, thank you very much.